If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hi there, it's your vagina speaking. I know sometimes I have a hard time getting there when we get down, but OMG Cream from Wisp is here to help. The instant arousal makes it easier to, It takes 2 minutes to order online, so let's give it a try. OMG. I literally just went to heaven. I'm gonna try that again. Go tell your friends though, get on Wisp. Order OMG Cream online at hellowisp.com. That's hello, WISP.com, and have it delivered for free. Use code OMG for 15% off your first order.
Welcome to mini episode number 417 of Real Life Ghost Stories, and I have 4 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from November the 8th, 2024, and story number 1 comes from Anonymous. I had an experience, is all I can say to describe it, but a few years ago at this point, I was helping out a family member at a family property who passed away several years previously, and I assumed I'd seen the individual I was helping walking towards a gate at the corner of my eye. So I turned to go and walk after them to see if more help was wanted. But as they rounded the corner, a sound directly behind me took my attention, so I did a 180 out of fright, and realised that the person I was helping was at the complete opposite side to the gate. It wasn't until I was talking with my current partner about it that I realised, since I thought it was the person I was helping, that it must have been his brother, who was the person who passed away years before. I am unsure if it was him saying I'm still here, or if I was even supposed to glimpse him. I also had a friend who claimed she could see spirits and often said a man had been following me for a while who gave me a look of familiarity. And when I was going through photos, she had seen a picture of me with the same individual mentioned above walking towards the gate, and she jumped at the opportunity to say that was the man. So here's my question, right? Was the family member always with you? Or were they only with you post being at the house sorting some things out? Or maybe that's just a really stupid question. I also think, Anonymous, you raise a really pertinent point where you say, was I meant to see him? Like, was I supposed to see him? I often wonder that when we hear stories where, people see a spirit or an entity, and the entity or the spirit is shocked that this person can see them. They're like, oh, hang on a second, you're not meant to be able to see me, and yet here we are. And that in turn makes me wonder, how often have we seen entities, spirits, etc., without realising that they are entities, spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call them? How often have we glimpsed somebody and assumed that it was somebody else? Assumed that it was, oh, that's whoever. Or, oh, that's just a person walking around the corner, and it's not. It's an entity. And I love the fact that you got that validation from your friend who could see spirits. Love it. What a joy. And story number 2 comes from Joan. In the 1970s, as a young teenager, I was invited to a sleepover at my best friend's house. Diane, my best friend, had also invited 3 other girls. So obviously there are 5 of us. Late at night, probably around 10 o'clock, we decided to levitate Diane. In order to levitate her, we positioned ourselves 2 on each side of her body as she laid on the floor. We each used 2 fingers on each of our hands, our first and second fingers. So 8 fingers on each side, slipped under her. After saying some incantations repeated over and over, she began to rise. As a skeptic, I thought it was a load of rubbish, until she rose above our heads. With our arms fully extended, we were still in contact with her body. We then lost contact with her, she kicked the ceiling, and she tumbled to the floor. Nick and I watched the original Craft recently. I also watched the new Craft film. Oh, that is not good. If you've not seen it, don't bother. It was God, it wasn't good at all. But Nick and I watched the original Craft, and when they do that, light as a feather, stiff as a board, and they rise her up into the air, when I first saw that film as a teenager, I was so enamored. I was like, I wish that I was a witch. When are my special powers going to come in, And I know there are lots of witches listening to this, right? But I mean in terms of the Craft, in terms of the powers that they had in the Craft, right? So when I got this story from Joan, I honestly was like, it does happen. So you can levitate somebody. I knew it. All of the stories were true. All of the urban legends were true. Because growing up, I feel like we all knew somebody who was like, yeah, we did that at a sleepover once and it actually worked. And I always thought that it originated from The Craft, the film. Turns out no. Back in the 1970s, Joan and her pals were levitating her friend up to the ceiling. And oh my God, I've just fallen into the most ridiculous rabbit hole of light as a feather, stiff as a board. So according to Wikipedia, right, I'm gonna blow your mind here for a second. According to Wikipedia, the oldest known account of levitation play comes from the Diary of Samuel Pepys, a British naval administrator. Pepys' account of levitation play comes from a conversation with a friend of his, Mr. Brisbane, who claimed to have seen 4 little girls playing light as a feather, stiff as a board in Bordeaux in France. Pepys' account of Mr. Brisbane's experience reads, he saw 4 little girls, very young ones, all kneeling, each of them upon one knee, and one begun the first line, whispering in the ear of the next, and the second to the third, and then the third to the fourth, and she to the first. Then the first begun the second line, and so round quite through, and putting each one finger only to a boy that lay flat upon his back on the ground, as if he was dead. At the end of the words, they did with their 4 fingers raise this boy as high as they could reach. And he, Mr. Brisbane, being there, and wondering at it, as also being afeared to see it, for they would have had him to have bore a part in saying the words, in the room of one of the little girls, that was so young that they could hardly make her learn to repeat the words, did, for fear there might be some slight used in it by the boy, or that the boy might be light, called the cook of the house, a very lusty fellow, as Sir G. Carteret's cook, who is very big, and they did raise him in just the same manner. And the little poem was slightly different. So it was, here's a dead body, stiff as a stick, cold as marble, light as a spirit. Lift yourself in the name of Jesus Christ. So this has been going on since the dawn of time. I mean, Samuel Pepys wrote his diary in the 1600s. Like, this is long time ago shit. And not only that, apparently it's real. And apparently scientifically it's all about weight distribution and everybody doing the same thing at the same time, and it distributes the weight evenly, and therefore it makes it easy to lift somebody, and my mind is blown. Honestly, Google it. It is well worth some time to spend reading about it. Joan, that story has it's made me giddy with joy. It really has, because these are the type of stories where you think, do you know what, magic does exist. Not in the way that was portrayed to me in The Craft, but it exists. And story number 3 comes from Louise. I felt compelled to contact you because I too worked in a Victorian psychiatric hospital. This one was in Wiltshire. Like your hospital, it was a very atmospheric place with lots of energy past and present. I did my training there and then worked there a total of 18 years. I'm not a sensitive person and never felt uncomfortable or anxious about being there. I also lived in nursing accommodation across the road from the hospital, which was also built in the Victorian era. I lived there for 5 years and loved it. My experience happened after qualifying as a psychiatric nurse and had worked there for about 6 years, and I had taken the night sister post, so I was working 4 nights a week, responsible for the whole hospital but posted on one ward. I'd been doing this for 2 years and was very comfortable going around the hospital at night and never felt uncomfortable. On this particular night, everything had gone to the usual routine. It was about 3:30 a.m. and I was sitting in the office at the desk starting to write up patient notes. Another nurse was sitting on the chairs to my left reading a magazine. I became aware of someone standing at the office door, and at first I thought it was a patient who had woken up. When I looked up, I saw a doctor, and this was strange because the on-call doctor doesn't come to a ward unless you bleep them. I said, "Oh, hello, what are you doing here? I didn't bleep you." And he didn't look at me or answer, he just turned and walked away. I got up and went to the office doorway and looked around, and the doctor was walking down the corridor on my right. But before he got to the end, he disappeared. I can't explain it. I could see him walking away down the corridor, but he just faded out, That's the only way I can describe it. Anyway, I don't know why, but it didn't scare me, and to this day it still doesn't. About 6 months later, I mentioned it to another member of staff who had worked in the hospital for 25 years and was near retirement. Partway into my story, she stopped me and then recounted an experience she had 20 years before, and it was exactly the same as mine. And by the way, the reason I knew it was a doctor when I saw him was because he had a white coat on, and my brain just told me, oh, that's a doctor, like yours would. But at that time, in 1998, psychiatrists didn't wear white coats, and they hadn't since the 60s, and they don't now. The other nurse was terrified and refused to work nights ever again. I think this was a replay of past gone by. It still doesn't scare me, but it has made me question life after death, etc. This definitely happened. I can see that man now. The hospital now has been sold and made into flats. Although my experience didn't scare me, I don't think I'd like to live in one of those flats. See, that's the thing, isn't it? You'd be like, I wasn't particularly scared there, but also would I want to live in a flat that was an old Victorian psychiatric hospital? Oh, I don't know that I would either. And, I'm not very scared of things. I wouldn't really be kept awake at night very often by scary things. But if I was living in an old Victorian asylum, I'd be thinking, I know what's happened here. Like, I know awful things happened here and people were incredibly distressed here. And I don't know that I could do it. Now, saying that, if I got the chance to go back and visit the hospital that I worked in and have a stroll around and, be there overnight, you best believe I would do it. Without a shadow of a doubt, I would do it. Would I live there in a flat? Absolutely not. I think what's really interesting and compelling about this story is that you weren't scared in the building. You weren't going around the building every day being like, oh, this place is spooky. Oh, I feel uncomfortable being here, or, whatever. That wasn't what you were feeling. You were just having a normal night shift. And then you look up and you see a doctor. And it's funny, isn't it, how your brain, doctors don't wear white coats anymore, or psychiatrists don't in those sort of facilities. And you look up and you see a doctor with a white coat and you think, oh, well, doctor with a white coat. And you don't think anything weird about it until you reflect on it afterwards. And I think you're right. This sounds like a stone tape theory situation, that this doctor was replaying his rounds. And I think it's also important to remember that not all doctors who worked in these facilities, even in the Victorian era, they weren't all bad people. They were people who were trying their best with the information that they had and the knowledge that they had at the time. There were obviously some who were bad people. People with mental health conditions and intellectual disabilities were often treated awfully. But, sometimes the intention was positive, right? The intention was good. And maybe that was somewhere, he worked for a long time, did those rounds all the time, and maybe in some way the building has held on to his energy and replays it back.
Will full coverage make me look cakey? Is my undertone neutral, or is it cool? We get it. Finding the right foundation is hard. But with Il Maquillage, it's easy to find your perfect match online. Customized for your unique skin tone and coverage needs. Plus, with Try Before You Buy, you can try your full size at home for 14 days. With over 600,000 five-star reviews, this best-selling foundation is going viral for a reason. Take the Power Match quiz now at ilmaquillage.com/quiz. ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
Renew your health and wellness purpose this new year with The Reset on Alo Moves, a curated weekly program of Pilates, strength, and step goals to kickstart your fitness journey. It's a 30-day week-by-week program, 3 days of Pilates, 2 days of strength, and 8,000 daily steps, plus bonus nutrition tips from Sakara. Plus, for only $99, you get a year's worth of access to Alo Moves, on-demand, full studio experience wherever you are. Get moving today at alomoves.com.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
On average, you'll have to wait 31 days to see an OBGYN. And if you're dealing with an infection or outbreak, you know you need care fast. That's where Wisp comes in. Connect with a U.S. licensed provider online and pick up safe, effective treatment at your local pharmacy that same day. Plus, get birth control and more delivered in all 50 states. Take control with comprehensive sexual and reproductive care, all from your phone. Wisp. That's HelloWisp.com. The waiting room can wait.
And our final story today comes from Haley. I wrote in a couple of years ago. The episode was day 30 of 31 Days of Terror, which was released on October the 30th, 2021. If anyone doesn't care to go back and listen to the episode, a quick summary is that my husband and I had moved into a newly built duplex in Lindale, Texas, that had a good amount of activity in it. It was the first time in my life, outside of sleep paralysis episodes, that I've experienced anything paranormal. This was also the place that turned my hard-headed skeptic husband into a believer. We moved out of that place 3 years ago, and the activity was partially the reason why we decided to go ahead and buy our home when we did and are currently in. My husband, Zach, decided that he was no longer comfortable there and wanted to move. Still, 3 years later, Zach and I will revisit the conversation of that house from time to time. We check in with each other just to try and re-rationalise the experiences we had. It's like we have to touch base still on whether or not what we went through was true, or if we had fabricated it in our minds. We always come to the same conclusion. Yep, we in fact had some weird shit going on at that house. So I figured I'd write in about the rest of our experiences there between the time of my last submission to the time that we moved out. We moved into the quadplexes actually, in the May of 2020 and stayed there for a year and a half. Altogether, there were about 15 buildings, each building having 4 units in it. They were big, nice and new. One thing I didn't mention in the first submission, because I didn't remember it until later, is that when we moved in, we met the neighbours to the right of us. They said they thought the unit directly to the left of us was haunted. It was said in a light manner, kind of playing it off as a joke. The couple explained that in the multiple years they've lived there, no tenants stayed in that particular unit for longer than a few months. The leases there were for a year minimum, so this meant that every tenant in that unit broke their lease early. At the time, there was currently a family with 5 children living there, and was coming up on their 6-month mark apparently. This information had completely slipped my mind, and I didn't remember it until we had bought our home and were moving out. Picking up from where I left off in the last episode, there was a bit of silence and calm for about a month. Zach and I had decided during that time that yes, everything was in our heads. But of course, things started happening again. In our room, we slept with a small wooden bat behind our door. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of the bat dropping to the floor. Not like falling down or falling over. It's the same sound that when you hold it just a couple of inches from the ground and let it go, and it bounces a couple of times until it comes to a stop. This happened on multiple occasions, but I never had the gall to look into that corner of the room when it was happening. Every morning, when the daylight came into the windows, I'd look to see where the bat was, and it was left in the exact position it had been the night before. I started laying the bat flat on the rug by our bed ever since. We have our small pup, Tuck, who is attached to us by the hip. He never leaves our side, especially once we're in bed. One night when Zach was on call, I was alone in the house in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard a bang in the house. Tuck abruptly got up and walked to the corner of my bed, staring into the bedroom doorway, at attention. He did the creepiest fucking head tilt, from left and then to right. I was holding my breath at this point, knowing the little fucker sees something, and shockingly jumps down from the bed and follows what I believe to be something out of the bedroom. I can't stress enough, he never leaves the bed without one of us. And since I was the only one in the house, he left me alone, which freaked me out. I walked out to follow him after a few moments, half expecting, really just hoping, the bang I heard could have actually been my husband getting home from his call out, and likely Tuck walking to our living room to wait for him to come inside. Which the dog never did this. Even on nights Zach did come home late, He'd always wait for me to get up first or wait for Zach to be inside the house before getting up. Lo and behold, Tuck was standing in our dining room looking up into a corner, watching something that I couldn't see. I scooped him up, went into the bedroom and locked my door until Zach got home. One night Tuck pulled another act to freak us out. We both woke up to him standing at the corner of our bed, growling and barking at our open doorway. Since we were sleeping at the time, we both got up and checked the house. Went to see if someone knocked on the door, but there was nothing. Things happened during the day, which is another reason why I feel like the activity was real. It's easy to scare yourself once it's dark out, but when things happen in the light of day unexpectedly, it's a different story. I've had my pantry door slammed shut when I had my back towards it. No matter how many times I tried to recreate it, it was impossible to do without me actually shutting it myself. There was a period of time I would hear marbles dropping and rolling on the floor in different rooms throughout the house. We had concrete floors, so the sound was distinct and would echo. I told Zach about this for days, but really was starting to think I was crazy and just making it up in my mind. And finally we both heard it in our living room together. No marble in sight. Zach was at work one morning and I was still in bed, laying on my stomach on Instagram, when I heard a rustling in the room. Tuck was next to me in bed as usual, so I immediately knew something was off. Instinctively, I flipped over quickly to see that my bedroom door was opening. And once I locked my eyes on it, it came to an abrupt stop. I sat up in my bed for about 10 minutes trying to settle it out in my head how it could have been happening, but just accepted that it did. Another morning, Zach was getting ready for work in our kitchen while I was awake in our room. I heard sniffing, and then I heard crying. I stopped what I was doing to listen a little harder, and I heard sobbing. My head went to the worst place and assumed he had received a call with some terrible news and hadn't come to me yet. I opened the door and bolted out to Zach, asking him what was wrong, thinking a family member had passed away. When he turned around, he was confused about my panicked expression on my face. He wasn't crying, just had a cup of coffee in his hand and was about as startled as I was. My urgency scared him, and it scared me that he didn't hear anything that I had. I tried to chalk this up to exploding head syndrome, but I was already awake, and had been awake. It was just something that I simply couldn't explain. During the summer of that year, my cousin came down to stay with us for a bit. She's a very intuitive type. In my first submission to you in the home I had my sleep paralysis episodes growing up, my cousin always said something was very dark about that house. And when she came to visit in our duplex, she refused to sleep in our second bedroom, which was my studio. She said something was very off and something didn't feel right. Additionally, in that episode, this is the room where the first activities began for me. Needless to say, I trust her judgment on these things. She's Muslim, and after we explained some things to her about what was happening, with our permission, she said a prayer over each room for us. She explained in their culture they believed in jinn, which I believe you've had a story or two in your podcast about. And if any listeners haven't heard of them before, I strongly encourage you to look it up, because I found it absolutely fascinating. Nevertheless, she explained there may be some tension in the house after the blessing, but her being around in general and the gift of her prayers put us at ease for a bit. A couple of weeks later, I was out of the house running errands and I got a text from Zach asking me if I left my projector running in the studio. The night before, I had been using it for a big project and shut everything down at around 9 p.m. I'd been home all that morning, in and out of the studio, and can confirm that it was off. I got home and he told me both my laptop and the projector was on and running. I walked in and turned them both off. I have my laptop specifically set so that when it goes into sleep mode, you still have to manually press the power button to wake it up. The projector was the same. No idea how it happened, but it spooked him pretty good, since something finally happened to him when he was alone in the house for once. Things kind of got a bit spookier here on out. Zach had his PlayStation at this point for about 6 or 7 years. Whoever is unfamiliar with it, you can turn it on by the controller or by putting your finger over the sensor on the console itself. The PlayStation was in our room, and one evening we were in bed, still awake, both trying to fall asleep, when all of a sudden we heard the dreaded beep of the console. My blood ran cold when I looked over and saw the blue light pulsing in the dark. I was frozen, and Zach sat up. I immediately said, "Your fucking PlayStation just turned on." And just like that, it turned off. We were both sitting up in the dark looking at it, and beep, it turned on again, the blue light pulsing. At this point I asked him where his controller was, thinking he or the dog might have rolled on it, but it was on the nightstand, untouched. He got up to go to the living room to look for the second controller, because for some reason his brain told him someone could be in the house. Why would they go for a console controller and turn it on? Beats me. But while in the living room, it had turned off and turned back on again. With every beep, my heart was pounding out of my chest. He came back in, and in a panic I told him to unplug the fucking thing, and he did. I couldn't sleep that night because I was anticipating another dreaded beep, knowing the power cord was out of the outlet, but thankfully it didn't happen. The same thing happened a couple of nights later until we learned our lesson of unplugging it every night before going to bed. In all the years he's had this console, and even bringing it with us to the house that we're in now, it has never done this before or since, even up to the point of me buying him a new one. One particular occasion, something happened with other people in our home. It was the only time that someone outside of Zach and I witnessed something. We had a fly swatter hanging from our cabinet pull. Out of nowhere, the fly swatter swung a 360 around the cabinet handle by itself. We all looked at each other and were just like, yeah, weird shit happens here sometimes. One of the biggest spooks for me happened in our kitchen. We have a rolling table that acts as a kitchen island. Bar stools will hook and slide underneath the tabletop to conserve space. You slide them back out when you want seating. Zach was in the shower and I had one bar stool out, sitting and eating my dinner, while the other 3 stools were hanging from under the table. I heard a clunk, clunk, clunk from the bar stool under the table directly next to me. Thinking my dog was under there and knocked it, I looked down and he wasn't in sight. I looked straight at the couch and he's there, sleeping on a pillow. Trying to register what was happening, I still hear the steady clunk, clunk, clunk of the stool swinging. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth like a metronome. On beat, on pace. It wasn't the swing of it accidentally being knocked, swinging a bit and settling to a stop. There was a steady 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I sat there in disbelief, jaw open, food still in my mouth, fork still in hand, and watched this bar stool swing back and forth. A big swing, nothing small. It was timed, on cue. It wasn't stopping, just keeping a steady pace. I simply stood up, calmly, put my fork down and walked to the bathroom where Zach was. On the way to the bathroom, as I had to round the table on the side where it was swinging, a gust of cold breeze hit the side of my face. So much so that it brushed my long hair off my shoulders. Making it down to the bathroom, I could still hear it keeping pace, swinging. What is wild is how calm I was about it. I think at this point I was so desensitized to everything that had been happening that year that I just accepted that it happened. After he got out of the shower, we tried to recreate it. We tried to make it swing, adjust it in a weird position, let it go, but nothing. Nothing we did could create what had happened. Afterward, this was around the point where my husband got serious about breaking our lease and moving out. This is one that we don't tell people about much because it sounds silly. But it freaked us the fuck out. It really freaked us out. We had a balloon in our house, helium. I don't remember the occasion. I'm not sure if it was brought over from our niece or nephew, but it was a foil helium balloon. This bad boy had been in the house for weeks at this point. Deflated, looking sad, on the ground in a corner, string still attached. And let me say this again. 4 weeks. For the life of me, I don't remember why we had it, but we did. One night after going out for dinner, we came home. We were hanging out in the living room, me on the couch, Zach standing by the counter, and we started talking about the balloon, saying we needed to trash it. I shit you not. When we started talking about it, the fucking thing that had been on the ground for weeks started to float. Slowly. We got quiet and watched it. One of us, probably me, threw out a "no fucking way" in an "are you kidding me" tone. It rose up, floated slowly across the room to meet Zach's height of 6 foot. I get it, sometimes balloons do floaty things, no biggie. But no AC was running, no fan was on. Zach, a beer or two deep from dinner, says something along the lines of, "Did it just come up to me?" while facing it directly in front of him. I'm kind of blowing it off because it's a damn balloon, but he's entertained at this, thinking it's freaky but cool. I'm blowing him off and rolling my eyes, and he says, "No, what would be crazy is if it came to you." Literally, at that moment, the balloon started to float to me on the couch, floating to me and lowering to my level. I was so silent watching it, and when it got about a foot away, I sprung up from the couch and told him absolutely not. The balloon continued, went up and over the back of our couch and down to our dog's kennel where he was sleeping. It hovered in front of the cage, and he started exclaiming, "Oh my God, it went to tuck." At this point I'm standing up, have both my hands holding my face in disbelief. The balloon made another turn and started floating back to us. I again moved to the other side of the room and told my husband to get rid of it immediately. We both had every single hair on our bodies standing up. He took it, deflated it, and threw it away. But for him it was the freakiest thing that we both witnessed at the same time. The last thing we recall happening at that house happened to Zach. At this point, we were in the midst of putting in an offer on our home, and probably solidified for him that we were making the right move when we did. We were both sleeping, and I woke up to a loud noise in our room. I laid in bed waiting for Zach to make a move to see what it was, but he wasn't moving. I waited a handful of minutes, debating on going back to sleep or thinking I should wake Zach up, so I turned over. When I rolled over to him, he had his phone flashlight shining into our closet. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me nothing. He was just seeing if anything fell. He got up, turned on the closet light, checked it out, and then turned off the light and shut the closet doors. We went to sleep. The next day he told me what actually happened. He said he woke up to the loud bang as I did, but what he saw shocked him. He watched 2 bright shining orbs float into our bedroom, around our closet doors and into the closet. And then the closet door started swinging back and forth. He got his phone out to shine a light on it, and it kept swinging until the moment I rolled over and it stopped. He didn't tell me when it happened because he didn't want to freak me out. We closed on our house within that month and moved out to a city about 30 minutes away. We were half expecting more things to happen while packing everything up, but nothing ever did. The more we talk about it, we don't think it was anything malicious. Besides the frightening night in the episode I wrote in prior, I just think it was just something wanting us to know that it was there. When we were moving out, we asked our neighbours, the ones who told us about the unit next to us, if they were sure it was that unit they were talking about being haunted. They were a bit confused and assured that it was, and asked why. All we told them is that for over a year, unexplainable freaky things had happened to us in our house. We left it at that. Didn't explain anything. Maybe we were afraid of being judged. What prompted me to write this is because of a conversation my husband had with a co-worker about 3 weeks ago. He's from Lindale. Zach had to pick him up since they were going on a work trip. While passing our old place, he pointed it out and told his co-worker, "We used to live there." After a moment, the guy asked, "Anything weird happen when you all lived there?" My husband was surprised and told him yes, but didn't explain much. Men being men and never getting into details like us women do, all the guy said back was, "I hear weird things happen there all the time." You can imagine my fury when he came home with this chunk of information that isn't a chunk at all. It is confirmation, however. So yes, I guess even with how vague that confirmation is, at least we know. No, it wasn't in our heads. Weird shit did actually happen there. All the time. Hello, Haley. Welcome back to the show. It's a joy to hear from you again. I had such a weird panic about how to pronounce your name. Like, I went back and listened to the previous episode and I was like, okay, I pronounced it Haley then. I'm sure it is still Haley now. I don't know why. Honestly, it took me ages to pluck up the courage to say your name. So if I said it wrong and it's not Haley and it's some derivative of Haley, then I'm very sorry. Firstly, isn't it amazing the things that you forget? Like when you've got an ongoing story or fiasco, and I think we've all experienced this, you know, you're telling your friend a story about something that's happened over a long period of time and you're like, oh my God, yeah, I forgot to say. Oh my God, yeah, I forgot to say. And you have to keep jumping back in the timeline to be like, oh my God, yeah, I forgot to say this bit. Imagine, like, because of all the crazy stuff that happened, the neighbours saying to you, hey, this place is haunted, actually didn't have much bearing on your story in the first place. Do you know what I mean? That you were just like, oh yeah, I forgot about this really important thing where the neighbours were like, these units are haunted. Wild. I know you said at one point in your story that you felt like whatever it was trying to, you know, trying to get noticed, trying to show you and Zach that it was there. And it really does sound like that. You know, the bat in your bedroom making that really distinct falling sound at night time and clearly being put back to where it was meant to be. The marbles rolling on the floor, but you can't find the marbles. Like, that's such a specific sound, the sound of marbles on the floor. I can imagine it in my head. You know, doors slamming shut by themselves. And I always think, you know, we say this all the time, but animals know things, you know. Just as I've said that, Hades is making noise, so I apologise if you can hear him. But animals know things. And when your dog behaves in the same way all the time and then suddenly it's like growling, staring into corners, following unseen presences around the place, oh, I'd be thinking, oh no, this isn't going to be good. And it does specifically sound like this entity is trying to get your attention by interacting with things that you use in your day-to-day life. So like the bat, you know where it is, you know exactly that it's there, you can hear that sound, you can identify the sound immediately. The sound of the marbles is going to make you want to look for marbles, right? Obviously, because you're going to be like, why are there marbles in my house and where are they? The laptop and projector is something you use regularly, something you were using regularly. The PlayStation, I assume, something that is used regularly. Like, those are all things that, you know, you are going to be interacting with often. So is it possible that this entity, this ghost, was interacting with those things because they're things that it sees you using? It always gives me the heebie-jeebies with these kind of stories when I think about, are these ghosts just watching us all the time? Because I'd really love it if they weren't. I don't need entities or ghosts to be seeing the weird shit that I get up to. I spent a good proportion of today pretending that I was in a band playing AC/DC. Like, nobody needs to see that, you know? And I can fully understand why you don't tell people about the balloon story, right? Because you'd be thinking, oh, people are going to think this is, you know what I mean? They're going to be like, really, it's a balloon, they float around. But when it's been in the same place for that length of time, right? And then it's floating around and seemingly going to each one of you, going to you, going to Zach, going to you, and then going to the dog. Like, come on. And I definitely, right? If my partner had come home to me and been like, oh yeah, somebody else told me that weird things happen in those duplexes or quadplexes, whatever they are, all the time, then, you know, I'd be like, well, surely you have more information than that. Surely you asked follow-up questions. Because I want to know all of the details. I want to know every single tiny detail. But at least, like as does happen in these stories, at least you got some validation. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Anonymous, Joan, Louise and Haley for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from November the 8th, 2024. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website, reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra spooky content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
To make switching to the new Boost Mobile risk-free, we're offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
So why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Because you have nothing to lose. Boost Mobile is offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
No, I asked why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Oh.
Wouldn't.
Because you love wasting money as a way to punish yourself because your mother never showed you enough love as a child?
Whoa. Easy there.
Yeah.
Applies to online activations. Requires port in and auto pay. Customers activating in stores may be charged non-refundable activation fees.